These people chose humanity when cruelty would have been easier. One could have destroyed a helpless enemy aircraft and been rewarded for it. Hundreds of soldiers could have kept firing because that was what they had been ordered to do. And one unarmed man could have remained in safety while innocent people were hunted outside. Instead, they chose to be the best of humanity, even when doing so placed their own lives at risk. The first story begins over Germany on December 20th, 1943. Charlie Brown was a 21-year-old American pilot commanding a B-17 bomber called Ye Olde Pub. It was his first combat mission as an aircraft commander, and his crew had been sent to bomb a factory near Bremen. But on the journey home, German fighters attacked. The bomber was torn apart. Its nose was shattered. Its oxygen, hydraulic, and electrical systems were damaged. Most of its guns stopped working. The tail gunner was killed. Several crew members were wounded, and the aircraft could barely remain in the sky. Brown briefly lost consciousness. When he came to, the bomber was flying dangerously low over Germany. Then a German fighter appeared beside them. Its pilot was Franz Stiegler, an experienced Luftwaffe pilot. Earlier that day, he had already shot down 2 bombers. Destroying one more could have brought him closer to one of Germany's highest military awards. And this should have been an easy kill. The American bomber could not outrun him. Its crew was exhausted, injured, and almost defenseless. Stiegler moved behind the B-17 and prepared to fire, but as he came closer, he could see through the enormous holes in the aircraft. He saw wounded men helping one another. He saw a crew that could no longer properly defend itself. To Stiegler, shooting them no longer felt like combat. It felt like shooting helpless men in parachutes. So he lowered his guns. The Americans did not understand. They expected him to attack at any moment. Stiegler flew beside the bomber and signaled Brown to land in Germany. The wounded crew might receive treatment, but they would become prisoners. Brown refused. He wanted to reach England. Stiegler then made a decision that could have led to severe punishment if his own side discovered it. He escorted the damaged bomber toward the North Sea, making it less likely that German defenses would fire on it while his fighter remained nearby. Once they reached open water, Stiegler looked across at Brown, saluted, and turned back toward Germany. The American crew made it home. For decades, neither pilot knew what had happened to the other. Brown eventually began searching for the German pilot. In 1990, Franz Stiegler, who was then living in Canada, answered his search. When the former enemies finally met, they embraced. They became close friends and remained connected for the rest of their lives. A few seconds of mercy had created something the war never could. But sometimes humanity did not appear in the choice of one pilot. Sometimes it appeared across an entire battlefield. By December 1914, British, French, and German soldiers were trapped in freezing trenches along the Western Front. Between them lay no man's land, an open strip of ground where stepping into view could mean death. Then, on Christmas Eve, something unexpected began happening along parts of the front. German soldiers placed small trees and lights near their trenches and began singing Christmas songs. British soldiers recognized the melodies and answered with songs of their own. The men who had spent months shooting at each other began shouting holiday greetings through the darkness. The next morning, soldiers cautiously climbed out of their trenches. At first, only a few stepped forward. Then others followed. They met in no man's land, shook hands, and exchanged cigarettes, food, photographs, buttons, and small gifts. In some places, they recovered and buried the dead together. Letters and diaries also describe soldiers kicking footballs around, although there was no single giant match across the whole front as the story is sometimes told. The truce was unofficial, spontaneous, and limited to certain areas. Fighting continued elsewhere, and commanders were uncomfortable with soldiers becoming friendly with the men they were expected to kill. Soon, the soldiers returned to their trenches, and the war continued. The Christmas truce did not end the First World War, but for a brief moment, ordinary soldiers looked across the battlefield and saw people who were cold, frightened, and homesick, just like them. They had been told they were enemies. For one day, they refused to act like it. 80 years later, Another man made that same choice in circumstances even more dangerous. In 1994, Rwanda collapsed into genocide. Roadblocks appeared throughout the capital, Kigali. Armed men stopped vehicles, searched for people, and killed those they had been told were the enemy. Captain Mbaye Diagne was a Senegalese officer serving with the United Nations. The UN mission had limited authority and resources. Diagne could have stayed at his post and argued that there was nothing one person could do. Instead, he drove into the violence. He found civilians hiding in homes and buildings, placed them inside his vehicle, and tried to carry them through armed checkpoints to safer areas. He could not rescue large groups at once. Often, he moved only a few people on each journey. So he returned again and again. At the checkpoints, Diagne survived by talking, joking, negotiating, and arguing with armed men. Sometimes he used small gifts to convince them to let his vehicle pass. Every trip could have been his last. He rescued children and families. He protected people from different communities. One survivor later said that when she was about to be killed, Diagne stood between her and the attacker and refused to move. No exact number of people he saved is known. The United Nations credits him with saving hundreds, while some estimates go as high as 1,000. On May 31st, 1994, Diagne was stopped at a checkpoint when a mortar exploded near his vehicle. A fragment struck and killed him. Years later, the United Nations created the Captain Mbaye Diagne Medal for exceptional courage in his honor. But the medal is not what makes his story important. What matters is that Diagne was not forced to make those journeys. Franz Stiegler was not forced to spare the bomber. The soldiers in 1914 were not forced to climb out of their trenches. Each had a reason to protect themselves, follow orders, or see the people on the other side as less human. Instead, they made a choice. History often remembers those who conquered the most territory, defeated the most enemies, or caused the greatest destruction. But perhaps some of the strongest people in history were those who had the power, permission, or opportunity to hurt someone and chose not to. Because sometimes courage means charging into battle, and sometimes it means looking at the person you were taught to hate and deciding that their life still matters.